the highest priority of the emergency service is here in White Marsh County. So it's going to be the safety of the visitors and staff here within your facility. So now we're just going to briefly touch on some of the different types of fire protection systems that you have here at the Hill at White Marsh. So obviously the very first thing is you have an automatic fire alarm system. You can see the strobe there, and then various toolboxes throughout the building as well. You also have a sprinkler system here. We won't go into that in too much detail. However, if you look above your head, those little round plastic discs in the ceiling, that's called a concealable sprinkler. Basically, that will melt at a certain temperature. The sprinkler is under there, and it will help contain the fire. Anybody in here who is part of the kitchen staff, we will also talk about the Anvil cooking hood suppression system that you have here in the next couple of slides. So kitchen staff specifically, you have what's called an Anvil suppression system in the kitchen. So the one thing to know about that is there's a pull station located near the cooking hood. You pull that pull station, it basically kind of works very similar to a sprinkler. There's a specific chemical agent in the sprinkler head there that will discharge to help put out the fire. Those pull stations should be unobstructed and clearly visible, and the kitchen staff should be aware of where that is at. Also within the kitchen, you should have a Class K fire extinguisher. They're typically a very large silver extinguisher within 30 feet of the commercial cooking appliance as well. And with the addition of the Class K fire extinguisher, and I put these last two in here because we had an incident at another facility. The person by no means did anything wrong. They did everything right. They had a small fire in a toaster. They ended up pulling the Anvil suppression system, dumping the whole system, and they could have probably just used the Class K, but at the following the very bottom point there, when in doubt, pull the Anvil system and follow your procedure. The next slide here, this is not a picture of your kitchen here, but of another commercial kitchen. What I have circled there are those Anvil nozzles, and you would pull the pull station. Those little orange caps there would come off, and the agent would dump on the grilling appliances and whatnot. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about the fire alarms. So in the resident room, they are what we call local alarms. So they will go off, and they'll notify staff first. And if another device were to activate, or if the one were to remain activated, it would then call out to 911. Any of the smoke detectors in what we would consider the common area, so like the hallway here, they would call 911 immediately. And also, this is a little bit different here as well because you have fire doors and fire barriers. So in the event of an emergency, it's not necessarily evacuating everybody out of the facility. It's more so evacuating people to a safe area within your facility. So again, always follow your facility's emergency action plan and operating procedures for that. We went over this. These are your three options depending on where you work, what your roles and responsibilities are here at the. So again, as a member of the staff here, you should always be aware of your specific roles and responsibilities of what you're supposed to do if the fire alarm is were to go off in this facility. So there's a couple steps that we want to take in a fire situation, right? So the very first step is to recognize that there's a fire situation or a potential fire situation here at your facility. So again, this is another open question for everybody here in the audience, but short of hearing the fire alarm go off and seeing smoke or fire, what other potential hints do you think we could have here that there could be an emergency or fire here at this?
Smell?
Yes, absolutely. So that's going to be probably one of your highest indicators. Also, maybe if the wall is like very hot, that could indicate that there could potentially be a fire behind the wall. But you're exactly right. So it's an odor. So the fire department would call it an odor of something burning. Again, you're not necessarily seeing smoke, but you're smelling something unusual. That also goes for any kind of weird chemical odor maybe that you would have. Just something that's out of the ordinary. And we always encourage people to call 911 and follow your procedures for that, because the last thing we would rather get out here, investigate, and mitigate the situation, as opposed to it's going to go away in a couple hours, and then now you could potentially have a bigger issue. So yes, the smell is probably one of your number one indicators, short of seeing smoke or fire. Then the second thing that you want to do is you want to activate the pull station. So even if the fire alarm system is already activated, when it's safe to do so, when you're in the middle of doing your procedure, always still just pull one of those pull stations, because the fire department's going to be responding here no matter what, expecting the worst case scenario. But if you pull one of those pull stations, that's an indicator to us, our dispatch center. We'll say, okay, now we're getting multiple pull station activations at this area. So that can kind of trigger to us, okay, well, maybe now it's a bigger issue, and we can kind of, we can get more resources here to help mitigate the emergency. And again, follow your evacuation procedures, whether it's actually physically getting out of the building, or going to a fire stairwell, or going to one of those, behind one of those fire barriers. And then the last thing is calling 911. And a lot of times, I put this in here and go, well, we've already pulled the pull station, the fire alarm's already going off, why does somebody have to call 911? So, commercial grade fire alarm systems, they go through a process, not going to go too far into it, but it's called verification. So basically, it takes about 3 to 5 minutes for that signal to get to the dispatch center. So now we're 3 to 5 minutes potentially behind, whereas if it's safe to do so, somebody here can call 911, and again, the dispatcher, they'll automatically be connected to a dispatcher, and the delay in any potential delay in response is mitigated because they're automatically connected to a dispatcher. The other thing that you got to remember is, all of the employees here, your facility the best, right? You're working in here every day. So, when the dispatcher asks specific questions, you could be able to help them, like, what's on fire? Where's the fire? What's the best entrance? So, that's another reason why we always encourage people, when it's safe to do so, to call 911 too. Same thing, if you don't think somebody called 911, and, we're getting 2 911 calls, that's okay. Again, that helps us make sure that we can get the appropriate resources here to help mitigate the situation. So again, just a basic safety tip here. So you never want to let the fire get between you and your route of escape. So we talked a little bit about this in the first session, but accountability of staff and residents is your most important job here. So can somebody here kind of tell me how you account for staff and residents if there's an emergency here at the hill? So with that, that should be detailed within your emergency action plan, which we're going to be going over in your next slide here. So again, as I was walking down here. I saw it on the wall, and I know it's in a lot of the offices as well. So your emergency action plan is basically an all-encompassing document for any actions during an emergency for any type of emergency, whether that be severe weather, fire, security issue, so, and within that EAP, it'll talk about, evacuation points, roles and responsibilities of specific staff employees. So, always be familiar with the EAP and your specific roles and responsibilities. So now we're just going to get into a little bit about how fire works. So fire needs 4 different things to occur. So it needs oxygen, heat, a fuel source, and then that chemical reaction. So we have oxygen in this room, and we have heat in this room. And again, this is a question for everybody here. Do we have a fuel source or fuel sources in this room? So we actually do have a lot of fuel sources in this room. So a lot of times when I ask that question, people are thinking about physical fuel, like gasoline or something like that. But really anything like up against this wall, right? That's a fuel source. These paper cups here, all of these sweeteners and everything over here as well. So the only thing that we're really missing is that chemical reaction, right? So I always like to use the match example, right? If I were to light a match and put it over here, over time, it would start to catch some of these items here on fire. And then a fire extinguisher job and a sprinkler, right, it's to eliminate one of these specific components to that fire. So smoke is made with the carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, both of which are very bad for us to be breathing in. So with that, if you're ever caught in a smoke-filled environment, stay low to the floor. That way it's cooler at the floor than at the ceiling, and also it'll help so that you're not necessarily breathing as much of those toxins. So now we're just going to go over a couple of the different types of fire. So you have primarily 5 different types of fire, 4 of which we're going to focus on today. So you have your Class A fires, which are what we call ordinary combustibles, so trash, wood, paper. Then you have your Class B fire, which is your flammable liquid, so like gasoline, anything of that nature. Your Class C fire would be energized electrical, so think microwave, soda machine, ice maker, something of that nature. Class D, combustible metal, you're not going to necessarily have to worry about that here. And then for the kitchen staff, you'll have Class K. So Class K is specifically cooking oils, cooking fats, greases, anything that you're going to be cooking with. That's what we would consider a Class K fire. So just going over the fire extinguisher real quick. So your fire extinguisher parts, right? So you have your handle and your trigger up there at the top. Then you have your pin there. Then your gauge. So with the gauge, we always want to make sure that the gauge is within the green, because that means that it is ready for use. I know the maintenance staff here, they do a fantastic job with checking those fire extinguishers, making sure that they're ready for use. And then down at the bottom there, you have your hose. The other thing as well, because this is a commercial facility, they need to be tagged and inspected every year. So if you look at that fire extinguisher they have there on the back table, you'll see that tag. It'll be basically punched with a month and the year. And you always want to make sure that is current as well. And on the extinguisher, they'll have basically, if you forget or if you're nervous, they'll have what type of extinguisher it is. So this one is your most common type, which is your what we call multi-purpose. So it can handle Class A, B, and C fires. And it also has the instructions about how to use a fire extinguisher. So always use your best judgment when using a fire extinguisher. So a fire extinguisher, depending on the size, if you were to pull the pin and just keep the trigger or handle pressed completely down, it has about 5 to 15 seconds before that extinguisher is empty. Again, it all depends on the size of them. But again, like now, that would not be the appropriate time to be using a fire extinguisher. So kind of the rule of thumb is if you think it's going to take more than one fire extinguisher to put out a fire, just evacuate and follow your evacuation procedure. The last thing you would want is for someone to get trapped or injured trying to do the right thing, but trying to put out a fire that one fire extinguisher is not going to be able to put out. So we're not going to go over this too much because when you go use the prop, we'll go over it. But the acronym to utilize the fire extinguisher is called PASS. So the very first thing is you're going to want to pull that pin. And the one thing that I was talking about in the last session is a lot of these extinguishers, they have like a tamper device on there. So when you go to pull the pin, you're going to want to pull and twist to break the seal. So we always want to aim at the base of the fire. And why we want to aim at the base is because that is where the bulk of that chemical reaction that we were talking about is occurring. The other thing that you have to remember is these extinguishers are pressurized. So if you were to aim at the top of the fire or in the middle, basically all that agent is going to do is just shoot straight through and not be as effective. Not going to say that it's not going to work, but the most effective way is to aim at the base of the fire. Then squeezing the handle. And we always want to sweep side to side at the base, again covering like the entire width of the fire, so that we make sure that we're completely eliminating that chemical reaction. So a couple safety tips when using an extinguisher. If you're using an extinguisher outside, we always want to stay uphill and upwind, and then never turn your back to the fire. Unfortunately, we see a lot of times where people get burned or get scorched because they think that the fire's out, they just turn their back to it, the fire will flare back up. So we always want to make sure that we're always keeping an eye on the fire, because within an instant, the fire could flare back up. Fire actually doubles in size every minute, so that's another reason why we don't necessarily want people using an extinguisher if they're not comfortable or if they think it's going to take more than one extinguisher to put out the fire. So we kind of just talked about this, but let's say you're on the first floor and there's a reported fire on the third floor. We don't necessarily want somebody on the first floor going up to the third floor to try to put out that fire, because again, it might only take them 30 to 45 seconds to get up to the third floor. But by the time they would get up there, the fire could potentially, again, cut off you and your escape route. So you could get trapped. So first off, I'm going to open it up for any questions. And then I would like to get the kitchen staff, security, and maintenance up here to use the prop first. And then anybody else who would like to, train on the prop is more than welcome. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
How often should you change your the fire extinguisher?
So a lot of them, I believe, like the residential ones are every 10 years, so they should have a date on the bottom, and then that's also why for commercial use they get inspected. There's a process, I believe it's like every 3 to 5 years for your ABC extinguishers. Like for commercial use, they get hydro tested, and they get a whole bunch of other tests to make sure that they're working properly. Any other questions before we jump in here?
I got a question.
Yeah.
So if we don't have a fire extinguisher on that jump, the fire is rosing up, we can use water?
So
If it's like a small portion of fire.
at that point, I would just recommend evacuating safely. We had a situation where somebody, the house fire, and somebody basically tipped the candle and caught the table on fire, and they ended up trying to put out the fire, and fortunately, they're okay and everything, but a neighbor actually called it in I would just recommend, if you don't have a fire extinguisher or access to one, just evacuate, because you know, the last thing you want to be doing is running back and forth to the sink and getting cups of water and trying to, again, because that's time, right? So, you know, I would just recommend following your evacuation. Again, the other thing too is like if it's a grease fire or something like that, you know, we don't want to be we don't want to be putting water on it. Same thing if it's a electrical. You know, that's why, you know, the most common types that you'll see in these facilities and most places are your ABC, because you don't really have to think about it, right? It can handle, you know, your class A, B, and C fires. So that's the other thing too, is like, you know, water is not suitable to put out every different type of fire. Water is really only good to be putting out on a class A fire, like that wooden trash that I was talking about. Like if this stuff was on fire here, you could use it, but if the microwave's on fire, you don't want to be putting water on energized fire. Good question. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for your attention today, and like I said, the kitchen security and maintenance, I'd like to get up here first to use the prop, and anybody else who would like to final it and practice on it as well.